range from language to literature to science, nature, and ecology, making this panel truly fused, and although not infinite, as Borges would have loved, certainly rich in interpretations and perspectives. Our first presenter is Jonathan Schwab. Jonathan Schwab is a student in the J. and Janine Schottenstein Honors Program and a member of the research group in the Ernst Lab at Yeshiva College. He has studied in the States and in Israel and has been involved in several projects in curriculum development and program coordination for young students, as well as in newsletter and article creation and edition. In this video, we find a combination of both literary and science interests, as reflected in his lectures and in the awards he was granted in scientific research competitions. The title of his presentation is Reflections and Refractions, Borges' Blending of Reality and Unreality.
The story begins, supposedly, in Montevideo on September 2nd, 1949. There, Borges gave a lecture describing the methods by which unreality can be invoked in literature. His catalog of 4 items was recorded at the time by Carlos Alberto Passos, reprinted by Emilio Rodriguez Monegal in Borges Paradouin Mime. This story is corroborated by James Irby in his introduction to the English translation of Labyrinths, who similarly counts these 4 in number. Belviado, in Borges and his fictions, quotes the same list and explains in a footnote that Monegal and Irby are the sole sources for this because, quoting a personal conversation with Irby, Borges destroyed his notes on that lecture. Those familiar with Borges' fiction probably expect to hear of a secret or imaginary encyclopedia substantiating these 2 accounts, but this is real life, not one of his fictions. The 4 items, though, serve as an excellent method for examining Borges' fiction. They are 1, the work of art within another work of art. 2, the contamination of reality by dreams. 3, time travel. And 4, the double. Borges' point, apparently, was to highlight those objects or methods that can be used to distinguish the unreal fiction, that which the reader identifies as impossible or inconceivable, from the real fiction, that which mimics what we know in life. Using these 4 as a model for understanding Borges has become a popular critical approach. 2 methods for using them. 1 is a complete deconstruction of Borges' stories, a search solely for the items in his catalog. Proponents of those readings analyze the ways in which Borges creates the unreal. To the exclusion of basic elements like plot and character, the readings focus all their interpretive energies on the unreal aspects of the stories. Paul de Man said, as an example of this, style in Borges becomes the ordering but dissolving act that transforms the unity of experience into the enumeration of its discontinuous parts. Note especially the enumeration and discontinuous parts. Opposite that model, and perhaps in reaction to it, are the exaggeratedly accepting theories proposed by other scholars. Borges' masterful combination of reality and unreality cannot be undone, and instead we must strive to read the whole story as one existence, neither a reality or an unreality, but instead a third class determined by some irreality and others Borgesality. As an example of this, Beatrice Sargo said, "In fantastic literature, Borges can outline a perfect order solely by the force of narrativity, and at least apparently independent of social reality." Apart from these 2 models, I propose a third model of reading, which differs in 2 large ways. The first difference, accepting that Borges uses certain items to distort the real nature of his stories into the fantastic and the unbelievable, we must also accept that an analysis of these items is not the end goal. Their mechanisms reveal greater narrative mechanisms of Borges. An examination of his list of unrealizers is only the first step in critically reading and understanding his stories. Further probing into the question of why, not just how, is in order. As an example and application of this distinction, and I will shortly come to the aforementioned second major difference, I would like to examine Borges' classic fiction, The Garden of Forking Paths. As you remember, the story involves a German spy of Chinese descent in England. With communication cut off and his nemesis drawing close, he hatches a daring plan. He will kill someone by the name of the city he needs to communicate, and the resulting press coverage will serve to convey his message. His intended victim, though, turns out to be an eminent scenologist who has studied the narrator's own ancestors' maddened and maddening attempts to create a perfect labyrinth and novel. The secret of the two, not understood by generations of Chinese descendants, but grasped by the English scholar, is that the novel's chapters do not unfold chronologically, but rather as a simultaneous fulfilling of all the possible choices a character can make. After hearing this, the spy sees his enemy drawing near, kills the scholar, and is arrested, though his message is supposedly conveyed through his ingenious means. The first approach that I mentioned, the deconstructionist one, would examine the story and immediately fly to the theory of the curious labyrinth novel, focusing on that as the essence of the Garden of Forking Paths, and ignoring the story that surrounds it, a story that not only mimics the real, but could readily be compared to a number of similar fiction and real-life occurrences. By contrast, the second approach that I mentioned would analyze the story's progression from beginning to end, drawing no distinction between its real aspects, namely the frame narrative, and the unreal aspects, the impossibly fantastic premise of the interior novel. Instead, I propose to read both parts of the story simultaneously, with an eye toward understanding why either and both parts exist. Obviously, the Garden of Forking Paths is an alluring concept, but had Borges merely described that concept, or written that very novel for us, its unreality would have made it less effective, would disable us from actually thinking about it the way that we do. Instead, it appears as a work of art within another work of art, Borges' first class of unrealizers. Within a setting of understandable reality, Borges creates the frame story with such recognizable and graspable features that he allows us to admit a certain existence inside that fiction to begin with, and from that standpoint, he unveils his powerfully unreal object. So the goal of the unrealizer is not to distance the point from us, but rather to use a real setting in combination with it to get his message across. When I described this model of reading, a metaphor was suggested to me by Professor Erwin Stalker, a physics metaphor, if you will. Just as sound can only travel through matter, Borges' message, which is contained in the unreality, can only be delivered through the setting of reality, through matter itself. The second major difference that I mentioned in my model of reading is that I differ from Borges' list. In place of his four, the work of art within another work of art, the contamination of reality by dreams, time travel, and the double, I offer a list of 5. The first is the reversal of reader and character, with the character becoming a reader, as we just saw in the Garden of Forking Paths, with the spy reading the internal novel. The second is the double, Borges' own formulation, interpreted as the fulfillment of the forking of paths, also as we just saw. The latter 3, I will first enumerate, then illustrate with examples. The third is the simultaneously compressing and magnifying effects of literature. The fourth is Borges' own second category, the contamination of reality by dreams. And the fifth is the double, as the second author and his abilities. Borges' purpose with these unrealities is different from the purposes of science fiction, surrealism, or escapism. He doesn't aim to provoke the imagination, explore the psyche, or entertain the mind, but rather to reflect the world of the reader, to make a mirror that forces the reader to confront the very human problems in their own world. Though we have already discussed the first category, the reversal of reader and character, I'd like to return to it for a moment and highlight Borges' own academic discourse on it. From Partial Enchantments of the Quixote, quote, "Why does it make us uneasy to know that a map is within the map, and 1,001 nights are within a book 1,001 nights? Why does it disquiet us to know that Don Quixote is a reader of the Quixote, and Hamlet a spectator of Hamlet? I believe I have found the answer. Those inversions suggest that if the characters in a story can be readers or spectators, then we, the readers or spectators, can be fictitious." Unquote. Borges argues that the reading of reading forces us to realize what our place is. That by observing Don Quixote's reading, for instance, we start with the idea that we are standing alongside the knight-errant himself in doing so, dealing with the multiple levels of fiction or reality by either climbing that ladder or descending it, and you can choose which direction of metaphor you think is appropriate. The same effect is produced by any of Borges' reviews of fictional works, the approach to Al-Mutassim, for one example. By reading the story and hearing Borges' judgments of that interior fictionalized novel, we admit that we exist in a first level of fiction, and we accept the existence of the novel in some way. Accompanying this, and also serving to convey the accordion-like contraction and expansion that Borges' fictions perform. The best example of this phenomenon is at the conclusion of Parable of the Palace. Shown all possible earthly beauties by the emperor, the poet recites the, quote, brief composition that we link indissolubly with his name, unquote. The inherent unreality, the impossibility of a single line containing a corporeal land, appears to the reader as just that, totally unreal. We know that a palace does not exist in a text, but the Borges twist to the entire story, the comment that he makes without the reader noticing until the end, is that his story does precisely that. His two-page construction creates and holds the entire palace and the whole land it overlooks. Its opposite is argued on exactitude in science, about a society so devoted to cartography that they create grander and grander examples until the maps themselves show the kingdom on a one-to-one scale, occupying as much space as the original. In both stories, the real skeleton, the poet's narrative or the society's existence, frames the unreal, the obviously impossible but alluring idea, and makes that idea more approachable and understandable. Borges' own second category of unrealizers, and my fourth, the contamination of reality of the dreams, appears also in Parable of the Palace. Quote, the real merged and mingled with the dreams, or the real rather, was one of the shapes the dreams took. Dreams for Borges are the converse of his interpolated stories. Dreams are often deliberately entered into, and control is asserted in them. Fascinatingly, this reverses what we know to be true in our lives. In our world, stories and fictions are the forms over which we have control, while dreams elude us, both in their progressions and in their meanings. But for Borges, dreaming might as well be writing. The man at the center of the circular ruins is an example of this, exercising his will in dreams to create another man ex nihilo. But that obviously unreal occurrence is mixed with a measure of very real comeuppance. The creator is revealed himself to be a creation. The creator of complete fictions turns out to be totally unreal. By accepting that dreaming process as a metaphor for writing, rather than solely focusing on how the dreaming affects reality, we reveal that Borges means to say there is nothing completely new in the world of fiction, and the thought that there is itself a fiction. Similarly, Borges refers to the control that one has in a lucid dream, surpassing even the level that one has over stories, in his aptly named Dream Tigers. Quote, at those moments I often think this is a dream, a pure diversion of my will, and since I have unlimited power, I am going to bring forth a tiger, unquote. But that tiger disappoints Borges in the end with its imperfections, representing the real counterpart to the attempted creation of the circular ruins. That which is only created by real means ultimately disappoints because it too is real and imperfect. Yet somehow, while we know that dreams cannot affect reality, the concept is alluring to us. What if dreams could? What if one could dream up another man? The sheer unreality of it does not hide the fact that the reader desires it, wants it to be true. Borges, aware of this, allows dreams to seep into the reality of the stories, allows that fictional desire to happen, to be fulfilled, but he warns of the dire consequences. If one deliberately dreams of tigers, they will never be perfect, and if one dreams of a man, he will have to let him go and discover himself to be another man's dream. To fulfill impossible dreams, one must indulge himself or herself in being a dream. The yearning is real, Borges points out, but the fulfillment not. The device works to illustrate that dreams are reserved solely for the world of the unreal, and the desire to bring them into our world, that of the real, cannot be fulfilled. The last item on the list that Borges formulated is the double, which I have doubled into two different concepts. One, the fulfillment of four-leaf path that we discussed before, and the second, the doubling of authors, or the creation of an interior second. Two stories, in some ways themselves doubles of each other, prominently feature Borges' questions on authorship. A survey of the works of Herbert Quinn and Pierre Menard, author of the Quixote. Both stories involve a complete invention by Borges of not just a character, but an author, a historical background, curriculum vitae, even personal inclinations in composition. Additionally, Borges does not speak much about the contents of either Quinn's or Menard's work, instead giving the reader only scant details about the mechanics of plot and general style for each. Their purposes, though, make their respective stories. Quinn's unique goal of starting with the end and describing every possible beginning very similar style to Sweet Pens and the Garden of Forking Paths, and Menard's style of coming to the Quixote through the experiences of Pierre Menard, drive the philosophical ponderings produced by the two pieces. Again, Borges does not present his radical ideas as his own, but rather constructs first a reality through which he can then express them. The author, made by the author, like the work of art within another work of art, and the dream within the fiction, makes it all the more understandable and readable. Dwelling on the unrealistic aspects of the interpolation, or of the authors themselves, would leave us without the more casual appreciation that Borges wants us to have of his works and ideas. Borges' works, across his own literary gamut from fantastic fiction to literary forgery to faux academic and even actual criticism, all echo the same basic truth. They must be engaged with an acknowledgement of his intention toward the unreal. An attempt to separate the realities and unrealities of his story, while appealing advantageous and not impossible, fails to understand the purpose of his deliberate and careful admixture of the two. Oppositely, an attempt to see the whole picture as an impossible mise-en-scène misses out on the delicate interplay between the two distinct elements of his stories, an interplay that ultimately represents Borges' writing itself. By engaging both of those aspects at once, and by studying what lies between them and how they work, the devices for separation, for creating that aura of the unreal, for creating the level of reality that allows us to see the unreality, we can reach a truer understanding